58 years of marriage. Fewer than a dozen public photographs of the husband. For decades, people genuinely believed Carl Dean didn't exist, that Dolly Parton invented a spouse to keep men away. Then she'd tell an interviewer her secret was simple. Stay gone. Laugh line. Everybody laughed. But there's a marriage license sitting in a Georgia courthouse, filed in a county neither of them lived in, and Dolly hid it from her own record label. There's also something she nearly did in the 1980s that she's admitted to, quietly, more than once. The joke was never the answer. Not really. Start with the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is what makes people uncomfortable. Dolly Parton has been photographed more than almost any woman alive. Album covers, magazine spreads, talk shows, theme park ribbon cuttings, Super Bowl halftime, 6 decades of red carpets. Her image is so controlled, it's practically an industrial process. Now, count the pictures of the man she was married to for 58 years. You can do it on your fingers. A few grainy shots from the 60s. A handful from award nights. A photo she released herself for their 50th anniversary. And even in that one, he's barely turned toward the camera. Carl Thomas Dean was born in Nashville on July 20th, 1942. He ran an asphalt paving business he took over from his father. He laid driveways and parking lots in the same city where his wife was becoming one of the most recognizable human beings on the planet. He did not go to the awards. He did not do the interviews. The Kennedy Center Honors in 2006 is usually cited as one of the rare times he showed up. And even that gets reported with a shrug, because nobody could ever quite confirm the pattern of a man who refused to be part of the pattern. Dolly has said he saw her perform live exactly once and didn't much care for it. Think about that for a second. Not he preferred to stay home. He watched the things she is famous for on Earth, one time in almost 6 decades. And passed. By the 1980s, the absence was so total that the joke stopped being a joke. Tabloids ran the theory that Carl Dean was a fiction, a prop husband, a convenient name on a form. Radio hosts asked it out loud. Dolly laughed it off every time, and the laughing off worked so well that it became part of the legend. The invisible husband, the mystery man, cute, harmless, faintly romantic. Here's the thing nobody pushed on. Before Carl Dean disappeared from public view, Dolly Parton hid him on purpose. And the paperwork proving they were married is filed in Catoosa County, Georgia. Not Tennessee, not Nashville, where they both lived. Hold that county name. It comes back. To understand what actually happened, you have to go back to a laundromat. She arrived in Nashville in June 1964, one day after graduating from Sevier County High School. Not with a dream, with a resume. Dolly Rebecca Parton was the 4th of 12 children born to Robert Lee and Avie Lee Parton in a one-room cabin on the Little Pigeon River. Her father couldn't read or write. He paid the doctor who delivered her with a sack of cornmeal. That detail gets repeated so often it's gone soft, so let's sharpen it. The man who couldn't read a road sign raised a daughter who would eventually build a children's literacy program that has given away hundreds of millions of books. She started the Imagination Library in 1995 and named the thing after him. He is the reason it exists. But the poverty is not the point. The professionalism is. She was singing on Cass Walker's radio show in Knoxville at 10 years old, getting paid. She cut her first single at 13. She stood on the Grand Ole Opry stage at 13. Introduced by Johnny Cash. By the time she got off that bus in Nashville with a cardboard suitcase full of dirty clothes, she had been a working entertainer for roughly 8 years. That's the correction most retellings need. She did not become somebody by marrying somebody. She showed up already knowing exactly what she was, which is why the laundromat matters. Her clothes were filthy from the trip, so she found the wishy-washy on Broadway. She was out front, walking around, waiting on the machine. A white Chevrolet pickup went by. Then it came back around. The man driving it said something about how she was going to get sunburned out there. He was 21. She was 18. He had, by his own rare account years later, 2 thoughts in immediate succession: that he was going to marry her, and that she was extremely good-looking. He asked her out. She said her mother wouldn't like her getting in a truck with a stranger. So he came to where she was staying, and Avie Lee looked him over, and eventually he was allowed in. Now notice something about the next 2 years, because it sets the whole machine running. They dated for 2 years while she chased a record deal. He didn't chase it with her. He didn't manage her, drive her to sessions, sit in on meetings, or introduce himself to anybody in the business. He watched the girl from the laundromat turn into a professional songwriter and made almost no attempt to enter that world. The question is whether he was hiding or whether he was being kept out. They married on May 30th, 1966. Dolly was 20, Carl was 23, and they did it in Ringgold, Georgia, in Catoosa County, about 2 hours southeast of Nashville, in a small Baptist church with essentially one guest, her mother. Ringgold in the 1960s was a wedding town. No waiting period, no blood test, quick paperwork, the kind of place Tennessee couples went when they wanted the thing done fast and done quietly. Put that next to the other fact from the same year. Dolly had just signed with Monument Records, and Fred Foster, the man running it, did not want her getting married. The labels read was that a 20-year-old girl singer with a wedding ring was harder to sell. So the standard version is that she was told to wait a year, and she waited about a week, and she solved the problem by leaving the state. Put those two things side by side. A label boss says don't. A 20-year-old crosses a state line, gets it done in a county nobody would think to check, and comes home and says nothing. That's not a shy husband hiding from the press. That's a young woman running a concealment operation, and the person being concealed is her spouse. She kept it quiet for around a year. Fred Foster reportedly found out later, the way people find out things. And this is where the arrangement gets its founding term. By Dolly's own repeated account, Carl told her early that he would never stand in her way. And in exchange, he wanted no part of it. No stage, no press, no industry. He would keep paving, she would keep flying, and the two would not be mixed. People hear that and file it under, he was a private guy. Read it again. That's not a personality trait. That's a clause. Two people, both barely out of their teens, agreeing in advance on which parts of their lives will never touch. Everything that happens for the next 58 years runs on that agreement. The machine started almost immediately. In 1967, she joined the Porter Wagoner Show, and that job is easy to underrate now. It was syndicated to 100 television markets. It made her a household face across the American South in a way records alone couldn't. She was on the road with Wagoner constantly, singing duets, cutting albums, working a schedule that ate the calendar. Meanwhile, there was a house in the Nashville area, a man in it, and a truck in the driveway. Look at the same 7 years from those two positions. From the road, it's a career detonating. From the house, it's an empty second chair at the table for most of the year. And the Wagoner partnership brought something else into the marriage. Rumor. The two of them were closer than professional partners usually are, and the whispers followed them for years. Dolly denied a romance, consistently, for decades. Wagoner told his own versions. That's unresolved, and probably always will be. What isn't unresolved is what it looked like from outside. Dolly Parton's public life increasingly involved a man who wasn't her husband, and her husband declined to be visible anywhere near it. By 1973, she wanted out of the partnership. Wagoner did not take it well, so she wrote him a song to explain why she was leaving, and the song was, I Will Always Love You. Sit with that. The most famous love song of the 20th century, later the biggest selling single by a woman in history when Whitney Houston recorded it, was written as an exit letter to a business partner. It's a goodbye, not a promise. Millions of people have played it at weddings. It was composed to end a working relationship. Hold that song. Its meaning shifts before we're done. She left the show in 1974. In 1979, Wagoner sued her for around $3 million. It settled in 1980. That is what disentangling from him actually cost. Lawyers, years, money. Disentangling from Carl Dean would never require any of that, because they had never entangled anything in the first place. And that turns out to matter enormously. Now watch the absence become a structure. Through the 70s and into the 80s, Dolly built a second life on the West Coast. Sandy Gallen became her manager and eventually her business partner in Sand Dollar Productions, Los Angeles, television specials, film, a whole apparatus of people whose full-time job was Dolly Parton. 2,000 miles east, a man was still bidding jobs on parking lots. And traveling with her, almost always, was Judy Ogle. They met in elementary school in Sevier County, 3rd or 4th grade, depending on which telling, and Ogle became her closest friend, her assistant, her constant road companion for decades. She was in the hotel rooms, on the buses, in the working life. Dolly has described her as the person she spent the most waking hours with in her entire life. The speculation about them has run for years. Dolly has addressed it directly and denied a romantic relationship, repeatedly, and she's never been shy about anything else, so take the denial at face value. But denial or not, look at the actual shape of the household. The wife travels the world with her childhood best friend. The husband stays home and does not attend. Whatever you call that, it isn't the marriage in the greeting card. So here's the question that should have been asked 40 years ago instead of, does Carl Dean exist? Who was actually living the day-to-day life alongside Dolly Parton? Because functionally, for enormous stretches of the 70s and 80s, it wasn't the man on the marriage license. He knew. That's the part people skip. This wasn't a man being deceived about his wife's schedule. He'd signed on to it at 23. But there is one moment where the wall between the two worlds cracks, and Dolly is the one who breaks it, in public, in a song everybody in the English-speaking world can sing. Jolene came out in 1973. It's 2.5 minutes of a woman begging another woman not to take her man. It's been covered by hundreds of artists. It's on lists of the greatest songs ever recorded. According to Dolly, the woman existed. Her account, given many times over the years, is that there was a bank teller, tall, red-haired, striking, who took a shine to Carl. He'd started finding reasons to go to the bank. It became a thing between them. Dolly has framed it as harmless, and even joked about it, saying she got a hit song out of it. The name came from somewhere else entirely. A little girl at an autograph line who told Dolly her name was Jolene. Dolly thought it was beautiful and stored it away. Now, put that together with everything else. The woman who married in secret in another state. The woman who never let her husband near her professional world. That woman wrote the definitive song about being terrified another woman would take him, and released it to the entire planet. You can read that two ways, and the honest thing is to keep both. Version 1. It's a songwriter mining a small domestic annoyance for material, exactly as she says. Version 2. Something in that house made her afraid enough that she wrote it down, set it to music, and then sang it for the next 50 years. What can't be argued is the surveillance implied. She was watching. Closely enough to clock a bank teller's hair color, closely enough to notice a man inventing errands. The invisible marriage was not a marriage she'd stopped paying attention to. And notice what she did about it. She didn't confront the bank. She didn't quit the road. She wrote a song, made money on it, and stayed. Then the machine got much bigger, and the house got much emptier. The Playboy cover in October 1978, Dolly in the bunny outfit, on her own terms, cackling about it, was the signal that she was leaving country music's fence line. 9 to 5 in 1980 made her a movie star and a #1 pop artist in the same stroke. Then more films, more television, more of Los Angeles. In 1986, she put her name on a struggling theme park in the Smokies and turned it into Dollywood, which would go on to become the largest employer in Sevier County. Every one of those is a public triumph. Now, flip each one over. Somewhere in the mid-80s, Dolly's health broke down. She had ongoing gynecological problems and underwent a partial hysterectomy in 1984. She has said plainly that she went into a deep depression afterward, gained a great deal of weight, stopped taking care of herself, and effectively stopped functioning for a stretch of 18 months or so. She has also described, in interviews and in her 2020 book, Song Teller, sitting on her bed during that period with a gun in front of her. What she says stopped her was her dog, Popeye, running up the stairs and jumping on the bed. She took it as a sign. She got up. That is her account of her own life. There's no independent record of that afternoon, and there wouldn't be. But she's told it consistently for years, and she is not a woman who volunteers weakness for fun. Here's what surrounds it. The hysterectomy also closed the door on children permanently. She and Carl never had any. Instead, they'd been raising her younger siblings. Several of them lived with the couple in Nashville during their school years. The nieces and nephews started calling her Aunt Granny. She became the family's center of gravity, except she was almost never there. The family center existed. She was on a soundstage in California. And that's the setup for the thing she has never denied. Everybody who tells this story assumes the same shape. Famous woman, invisible husband, and somewhere in the shadows, his failings that she forgave. The evidence doesn't support that shape. There is no documented Carl Dean affair. No mistress, no scandal, no lawsuit, no tabloid catch. Nothing. 58 years, and the man generated less controversy than most people generate in a bad week. The person with the documented crisis of loyalty in this marriage is Dolly Parton. She has said it herself, more than once, always without a name. Around that same broken stretch in the mid-80s, she has acknowledged that she was in love with someone else. She's described it as a serious feeling, not a passing one, and she's connected it directly to the worst period of her life. In her own telling, the marriage came under real strain, and she has said the reason it survived is that she and Carl talked about it rather than blowing it up. That's her version. There's no letter, no third party, no corroborating document. Nobody has ever produced a name. Researchers have looked. But take her at her word for a moment, and the entire premise of this story inverts. The title asks why Dolly Parton refused to divorce Carl Dean. The implied picture is a woman trapped by a disappointing man. What the record actually shows is a woman who had every practical exit available to her. Her own money, her own fame, her own coast, no children, no shared business, no church that would have stopped her, reaching the edge of leaving and turning around. For decades, the public was busy asking whether Carl Dean was real. Nobody thought to ask whether Dolly Parton nearly ended it. She didn't. That's the actual mystery. So why not? Start knocking down the easy answers, one at a time. Religion? Her faith is real, and it runs deep. She prays, she writes gospel, she talks about God constantly. But it's a personal faith, not an institutional one. She isn't answerable to a bishop or a congregation. No church could have made her stay. And she has been publicly, cheerfully unorthodox on plenty of things her Pentecostal upbringing would have disapproved of. Faith is a piece. It isn't a lock. Money? This is the one that collapses fastest. Divorce keeps a lot of women in a lot of marriages, but not this one. Dolly Parton owned her publishing. She built Dollywood. She built Sandollar. She built a company that has been valued in the hundreds of millions. Carl Dean paved roads. If anything, the financial pressure ran the other direction. And here's the striking part. There's no evidence he ever tried to touch any of it. No shared production company, no management role, no Mr. Dolly Parton title. In an industry stuffed with husbands who appointed themselves manager and then sued, Carl Dean stayed out of the ledger entirely for 58 years. Children? There were none. The most common reason people endure a marriage for decades simply does not apply here. And the marriage continued for 40 more years after the possibility ended. Public image? She survived a Playboy cover, a rumored affair with her television partner, endless speculation about her best friend, and constant jokes that her husband was imaginary. A divorce would have generated headlines for a week. The woman who has weathered 50 years of comment about her breasts was not going to be destroyed by a filing. So, not doctrine, not money, not children, not reputation. Every obvious explanation for why a woman stays fails here, which means whatever kept her there was something she actually wanted. Here's what the evidence suggests she was buying. Go back to the clause from 1966. He never stands in her way. He never enters the machine. For most couples, that arrangement would be a slow death. For these two, it was the entire product. Consider what she was, everywhere else. Dolly Parton is a constructed thing. The hair, the nails, the figure, the laugh, the perfectly timed, self-deprecating joke that ends the conversation before it gets anywhere real. She has been explicit about this her whole career. She talks about Dolly Parton in the third person. She calls it a character. She has said the woman inside knows exactly what she's doing with it. A character needs somewhere to be switched off. And the one place on earth where nobody was buying tickets was a house in Tennessee occupied by a man who had watched her perform once and hadn't enjoyed it. That's the trade. He got total anonymity, which he clearly wanted more than he wanted proximity to fame. She got the one room in the world where she was not a product. And notice the identity underneath. She married at 20 and legally became Dolly Rebecca Parton Dean. She's talked about the split, Parton on the marquee, Dean at home. She kept both. She never dropped either. Now go back to that joke. The secret to a long marriage is stay gone. Everyone heard a wink about time apart. Read it as a description of the actual system and it stops being funny. Distance wasn't the flaw in this marriage. Distance was the mechanism. Remove it and the whole thing collapses, because the value of that house was precisely that it contained none of her working life. She wasn't tolerating a husband who wouldn't show up. She was protecting a place where nobody was watching. And then, slowly, she stopped leaving. Nobody announced it. There was no farewell tour, no statement, no retirement. She did the Pure and Simple tour in 2016 and then simply never mounted another full one. She kept recording. She kept doing one-offs, residencies, television. But the woman who had spent 5 decades in motion stopped going. She has said the reason was Carl. His health was declining, and she didn't want to be away. Read that against the previous 50 years. The person who was famously never home became the person who wouldn't leave. That same year, 2016, they renewed their vows for their 50th anniversary. And Dolly, who had spent half a century keeping this man out of frame, released the photographs. A white gown, a veil, Carl in a suit. She said she'd been robbed of a real wedding the first time, off in a Georgia church with only her mother there, so she was taking one. It's also, and this is the part worth noticing, the single largest release of Carl Dean imagery in his entire life. After 50 years of protecting the wall, she was the one who opened a window in it. On her terms. On an anniversary. Still controlling exactly what the public got. Then came the strangest gift in the whole story. In 2023, Dolly Parton, 77 years old, country music royalty, made a rock album. Rockstar. 30 tracks, guest list stacked with legends, and on it a cover of Stairway to Heaven. Carl Dean was a rock fan. Led Zeppelin, hard guitars, the loud stuff, the exact music his wife had spent her life not making. She has said flat out that she made that record partly for him. Put the whole line together. He watched her perform once and didn't like it. 60 years later, she recorded an album in his genre. The woman who never let him into her working world finally let him choose the set list. Not because he asked. He never asked for anything in 6 decades. She did it anyway, at the end, when he was sick and not going anywhere. Carl Dean died on March 3rd, 2025. He was 82. What happened next was completely consistent with everything that came before it, and it still managed to be startling. There was a funeral. It was private, immediate family only. No public service, no cameras, no celebrity attendance, no live stream, nothing. One of the most connected women in American entertainment buried her husband with the door shut. Her statement was short. She said they'd spent many wonderful years together, that words couldn't do justice to the love they shared for over 60 years, and she asked people to respect the family's privacy. Then she asked for the privacy again, and the family gave the public no burial location. There was no announcement, no memorial address, no place to send flowers. For a man whose entire existence had been doubted in print for 50 years, the final act was the family declining, one more time, to produce him. She protected him after he was dead exactly the way she'd protected him alive. But she didn't go silent. A few weeks later, she released a song called If You Hadn't Been There, and the video used their photographs, the small private stock of images accumulated over 6 decades. She had control of the archive. She always had. So she chose what the world would finally get to see, and when, and set it to her own music. Then the year got harder. In the autumn of 2025, her sister Frida publicly asked people to pray for her. Dolly postponed her upcoming Las Vegas dates, and the internet did what the internet does. Dolly answered it herself, on camera, cracking that she wasn't dead yet, and that God wasn't through with her. Same instinct as always. Get in front of the story, make it a joke, close the subject. She'd been doing that since 1966. Now go back to Catoosa County. For years, when people insisted Carl Dean was a hoax, the answer sitting in a Georgia courthouse was a marriage license from May 30th, 1966. That piece of paper existed the whole time. It was the proof, and almost nobody bothered to go look for it, because the joke was more fun than the file. At the start, that document reads like evidence of a hiding husband. By the end, it reads as the founding charter of the arrangement. 2 20-somethings drove out of state, past the record label, past the press, past everyone with an opinion, and made a legal agreement in a place chosen specifically because nobody would notice. The concealment wasn't shame. It was the first act of the system. So why did Dolly Parton refuse to divorce Carl Dean? Outsiders assumed the usual, loyalty to a man who bored her, or fear of the headlines, or a country singer's sentimental attachment to the word wife. None of that survives contact with the record. She had the money, the fame, the coast, the freedom, no children, and by her own admission, at least one serious reason to go. What the evidence suggests she actually valued was narrower and much stranger. One house. One person who wanted nothing from Dolly Parton, because he had never signed up for Dolly Parton. He'd signed up for a girl outside a laundromat on Broadway who needed to wash her clothes. And the title has it backwards. She never refused a divorce, because there's no evidence one was ever on the table. What she refused, for 58 years, was exposure. She kept the loudest career in America and the quietest marriage in it, and she never once let them into the same room. She wrote a goodbye song in 1973 that the world turned into a wedding standard. She spent her life being misheard that way, and she let it happen because the misunderstanding was doing the work. The public got Dolly Parton, Carl Dean got the rest, and he got it privately, and when he died she didn't even tell us where she put him. There's no grave to visit. There's a license in a Georgia file drawer, dated May 30th, 1966, signed by 2 kids, who had already agreed on the terms. That's all she ever let anyone have.